Good afternoon to our honorable speakers, distinguished guests, and ladies and gentlemen, joining us from various places. Sabal Khair, Urahibu Bikum. Let me introduce myself. My name is Angel Diaz, and I represent the EU-funded Enhanced EU-GCC Political Dialogue, Cooperation and Outreach Project, and I will be moderating the event. I would like to welcome you all to the webinar, Policy Approaches and Instruments to Address Plastic Pollution at Source, organized in partnership with the Environment Society of Oman, European Environmental Bureau, and the European Union Delegation to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the Kingdom of Bahrain, and the Sultanate of Oman. During the event, the speakers will analyze how policy can address plastic pollution and will focus on instruments to change the market, sharing to this end the EU experience. To help us to do that, we are delighted to have the intervention of His Excellency Patrice Simonet, Ambassador, European Union Delegation to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the Kingdom of Bahrain, and the Sultanate of Oman, Ms. Suad Al-Harti, Executive Director of the Environment Society of Oman, Mr. Piotr Barshak, Mr. Enzo Faboino, Mr. Stefan Arditi, and Ms. Anna de Sogus, who are experts from the European Environmental Bureau. Before starting the intervention of our distinguished speakers, let me quickly request your kind assistance on the following points. Please mute yourselves whenever you are not giving the floor, and if possible, turn off your cameras during the main session. During the event, we will also have time for discussion in smaller groups, and this will not be recorded. The main session will be recorded, and there is a Zoom voice that warns you when this is started, and will be available at the Environment Society of Oman YouTube channel. If you would like to ask any question or have comments, please raise your hand by clicking on the right button on your screen or send them through the chat box. Kindly note that at the end of this workshop, we will share the link with a brief survey, which we would kindly ask you to complete, allowing us to know your opinion and to improve for future similar events. To begin with, let's start off with our first speaker. I would like to welcome and give the floor to His Excellency Ambassador Patrice Simonet. Excellency, thank you very much for being with us today. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. Madam Executive Director Suad Al-Harti, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues. I'm very pleased to welcome you all for this second webinar, which is part of a series of activities that the EU is organizing in collaboration with Omani and European partners towards the end of plastic pollution. The EU-Oman cooperation arrangement signed between the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Sultanate of Oman and the European External Action Service 3 years ago is testament to the fruitful cooperation between the EU and the Sultanate in many areas, including climate change and transition towards green economy and green energy. So I would like to thank again Madam Suad Al-Harti, Executive Director of the Environment Society of Oman, and our team for this great collaboration that we have. You are doing an impressive work to raise awareness about environmental protection. Many thanks as well to the European Environmental Bureau, which is Europe's largest network of environmental citizens organizations from across 35 European countries, so even beyond the European Union. For those of you who attended the first seminar last week, I hope you found the best practices presented by the EU inspiring. Our experts shared insights on how to achieve behavioral change regarding the use of plastic, as well as systemic solutions implemented to prevent plastic pollution in the future. Today's webinar will continue this discussion and will focus on policy approaches and instruments to address plastic pollution at source, a topic of primary importance where we have extensive experience to share. As you probably know, the European Union is a world leader in climate action. The EU Green Deal is a milestone in EU's policies. It aims at making Europe the first continent to become climate neutral by 2050 and at protecting our planet for generations to come and with no one left behind. Last year, the European Commission adopted a new circular economy action plan. It precisely targets how products are designed, promotes circular economy purposes, encourages sustainable consumption, and aims to ensure that waste is prevented. And last but not least, that the resources used are kept in the economy for as long as possible. Today, we wish to share with you again the EU experience in terms of EU plastic strategy, as well as to touch upon the issue of COVID-19 impact on plastics. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope that this webinar and the EU best practices on sustainable production will be thought-provoking and helpful. More than ever, we stand ready to continue working together on the green transition and to deepen EU-Oman cooperation. I would like now to wish you an interesting webinar, fruitful discussions, and some level of fun as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for your words. I would like to give the floor to Ms. Suad Al-Hati, Executive Director of ESO. Madam Hati, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Angel. Salam alaikum, everyone. Good morning, Your Excellencies, ESO members and speakers, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for taking the time to join us here this morning as we learn more about the plastic pollution crisis, and open the doors to hear your feedback and input on the subject. We are honored to be collaborating with the European Union delegation to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the Kingdom of Bahrain, and the Sultanate of Oman to raise awareness and understanding about key environmental issues. The topic of today being that of plastics and policy instruments. Given the long-standing experience that several EU nations have with regards to waste management, plastic pollution, and recycling, and given our own intentions here in Oman to address these same issues, the ban on the use of single-use plastic bags at the beginning of this year being an initial first step, we thought it would be a very fitting subject to explore, looking into the current state of plastic pollution, solutions towards a circular economy, and the role of consumers and society working hand in hand with policy instruments. We are honored to have the support of the European Environmental Bureau to facilitate these webinars, today's session being the second of a two-part series. The Environment Society of Oman was established in 2004 and remains the first and only environmental NGO in the Sultanate with a mission to conserve Oman's natural environment and influence environmentally sustainable behavior through awareness, education, and conservation. In doing so, supporting Oman's Vision 2040, which recognizes the importance of Oman's natural resources and environment. With Plastic Free July around the corner, it's very fitting having these webinars take place in June. Accepting alternatives to single-use plastics is an initial step, and we hope you enjoy the upcoming webinars and consider what more we can do as a society. The level of support that we have received so far in terms of registrations for both of these webinars shows your willingness and desire to do more. We look forward to hearing your feedback and input throughout the sessions today. Hope you enjoy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Suad Al-Hati, for your very interesting and encouraging words. May I give the floor now to the experts from the European Environmental Bureau, Mr. Piotr Barszak, Mr. Stefan Arditi, and Mr. Enzo Faboino. Gentlemen, the floor is yours.
Good morning. Thank you very much. for the introductory speeches. It set up very well the scene, reminded about the first webinar that we had 1 week ago. Thank you to everyone who joined last time and also today. I know that there will be a little bit of overlap, reminding ourselves some of the points from the first webinar. Today we are going much deeper into the policies aspects. So we also recognize that we are here, we are 76 now, great. We are here with a group of stakeholders, yourself, who are already aware about the problem. So there are points that we will not touch upon. But we will go into details. We will use sometimes the specific jargon because we assume that you already know the subject. But please, in the chat, just say that we are going too much into details or there is something not clear. Note it in the chat, and also there will be questions at the end of each session explaining if something was not clear. Just to recap, the first session 1 week ago, the first webinar was aimed at general public, explaining the problem and possible solutions at each level, city, corporate, and national level. Today we are going into policies that could be used to address the problem of plastic pollution holistically, based on what we learned here in European Union. And to explain why it's the EEB, well, thank you first of all for inviting us, but we've been here in Brussels, this is where we are based, since 1974, working hand in hand with all European institutions in developing the environmental policies, including waste, circular economy, and plastic pollution policies. Together with my colleagues here today, I will present with Enzo Favono, who is Italian himself, and he's very, very active in every country in Europe, but also beyond, with a lot of experience in Asia, and also giving lectures basically everywhere in Africa as well. My other colleague, Stefan Arditi, who is joining us from background, and Anna Dezogus, who you may know from the last webinar as well. They are French and Polish. I'm Polish Belgian, so as you see, we have a lot of different nationalities here to show that the approach in Europe is quite ambitious and similar in many countries, because we have specific policies and at horizontal level. If I may ask everybody to mute the microphone. Thank you. We have members. As Ambassador said, over 170 member organizations now all over Europe and beyond, and we work hand in hand with them to implement those policies that are decided jointly in Brussels. So about today's webinar, just quickly I go through the agenda. We will have 3 parts. The first part is introduction by my colleague Enzo. We will introduce the policy tools and how they are important to trigger the systemic change. And then we will have an interaction. Like last week, interaction will happen in breakout rooms. We will explain to you later how it works. And then we come back to the plenary, like now, to discuss the findings, discussions that happened in the breakout rooms. Then we go to the session 2 and session 3. At each end of the session, we will have question and answers in plenary. We will not break out into rooms anymore. And of course, at the end, we'll have overall question and answers and concluding remarks. So I think that's it for the beginning. I will now pass the microphone to Enzo to start with the first part, explaining the policies and how are they triggering the systemic solutions. Enzo.
Many thanks, Piotr. Sabah al-Khairi. Good morning, everybody. We are super excited to have this webinar session with the governmental institutions, with the stakeholders, because you are the ones who drive the change. And we want to set the scene, first of all, why working on plastic is becoming so important globally, and why policies are being adopted, are being defined, or have already been defined by many international institutions or national institutions, but which policies as well. And as you will see, there is no silver bullet. We need, this is a very complex issue, and so we need to act at many different levels, from economic instruments to bans and restrictions to market-based instruments, and so on and so forth. But we will have the time to dig deeper in each and every single topic. To start with, let's set the scene. So, of course, plastics is climbing up in the rankings of the debate across the public opinion worldwide. Many governments, international institutions, the United Nations Environmental Program themselves, they are discussing the problem because we know there is, first of all, the loss of beauty, which is what strikes our eyes, our consciousness right away. But besides that, there are many more issues. Some of them may be more insidious, such as microplastics, because plastics do not degrade, but they fragment into smaller pieces. This enters the food web, and so it may be a direct threat also to our health and to the health of the food web as a whole. If we may go to the next slide, please. We may start with a few key facts and figures. Certainly, there is so much talking about the threat to our oceans. According to latest calculations, there's some 10 million tons of plastics which are ending up in oceans a year. To track it to a more familiar figure, you may consider as a truckload a minute. It's like one truck being willingly unloaded into the oceans every minute, which is not affordable anymore, of course. But 80% of the plastics in the oceans are actually originated by inland sources. So it is mainly on the mainland that we have to fight this war in order to find consistent solutions to the problem. Basically, the annual global production of plastics is around 400 million tons. So if you make a proportion of the plastics which are ending up in the oceans, they are only a smaller percentage of the total plastic production. Let us stress it because, of course, behavioral change is important by people, but education, awareness raising, much as it is of fundamental importance, it is not sufficient on itself. If you make a calculation, the percentage of the plastics which are ending up in the oceans is only 2.5% of the total production of plastics. So we may even reduce further this percentage, but still it will apply to a huge amount of plastics which are being produced every year. Of course, we say, well, we have got recycling. Recycling is great, but recycling is not sufficient. It is not enough. The current recycling rate in the world is around 15%. On historical basis, it has been only 9% since plastics first appeared on this planet. In Europe, since we have got extended producer responsibility, which is a type of strategy which we will discuss further on. So this is propelling better separate collection and recycling of plastics, but still only 40 to 50% of packaging plastics, which are the plastics covered by extended producer responsibility, is actually being recycled. So recycling is important, but it is not the silver bullet. Let's go to the next one. Also, what if we go on with a BAO scenario, business as usual? I took part in an international expert panel who published a fundamental report, Breaking the Plastic Wave. This was even published on Science, one of the most credible scientific magazines out there. And we calculated that with no action being considered in order to curb the problem, by 2040, the total amount of single-use plastics generated a year around the world would become double as much, twice as much. The total leakage of plastics into the oceans would be 3 times as much, so it would grow up to 29 million tons a year. and the total amount of the total buildup of plastics into the oceans, because the annual amount which ends up in the oceans is not replacing the amounts from previous years. It basically adds on top of them, just because plastics don't degrade. So the total buildup of plastics into the oceans would become 4 times as much. Of course, we cannot afford such a scenario. Oceans are a primary resource for the food web, for the environment, for the beauty, for tourism, for fishery, and so on and so forth. So we cannot afford it. Let's go to the next one. So how did we get there in order to fix our ideas around the problem? We are simply producing too much plastics. But plastics are not a problem as such. The problem is mostly related to single-use plastics, because there are also durable plastics. Roughly 50% of the total plastics we produce are durable plastics, which are not so prone to getting dispersed into the environment. For instance, the computer chassis from which I'm talking to you today, or furniture, construction, automotive, the car shapes, the motorbike shapes, they are made mostly of plastics. And yeah, it's good using plastics for that in order to make it more lightweight. That's not a big problem in terms of dispersion of plastics. We just have to collect those plastics at the end of life and possibly, hopefully, recycle them as much as possible. The main problem is related to single-use plastics, because single-use plastics are made to last in our hands for a few seconds and forever and more into the open environment. So we have got a broken linear system, which is based on the so-called linear economy, the paradigm of which is take, make, waste. By take, we extract primary raw materials. By make, we make them into industrial products. And by waste, we need to dispose of the final discards, the final rejects. Of course, this causes 2 types of problems: continued extractions of primary raw materials and continued need to find disposal sites. So we have to shift towards a more efficient system, which is based on circular economy. In circular economy, we try to retain materials in the loop in their best and highest status for as long as possible. We will see the details in a while. This is basically an infographic which is showing the current fate of packaging plastics worldwide. And as you can see, out of a total which is roughly around 80 million tons a year, which are produced, only a smallest percentage gets recycled, 2% through closed loop recycling, which is high quality recycling. For example, barrel to barrel. From a barrel, we produce another barrel. And another 8% is cascading recycling or downcycling from a barrel to a jumper or from a barrel to another type of clothes, which is still recycling, but it is lower quality. So it's not fully circular if you think around it at a deeper detail. The problem is that most of the plastics are ending up in landfills where they fill up the space, or in incineration where they produce fossil carbon dioxide, which is a further carbon burden, exacerbating global warming, or they end up dispersed into the open environment. Next. So basically, we need to change our paradigm. We need to change our views around a global plastic strategy. And this is why we come up with this fundamental question. You can make a similar example. We also used it during the previous webinar. If you come home and you find your apartment, which is getting flooded, what would you do? Would you start mopping up the water while the tap is still, flooding your apartment? Would you set up a meeting with your neighbors to discuss what to do while the apartment is getting flooded? Or would you rush to the tap and close the source of the flooding? Of course, this is a rhetoric question. And of course, the third answer is the best one. So we need to close the tap, basically. We have seen that the problem of dispersion of plastics into the environment and the threats to our health, to the food web, to the environment, and so on and so forth, is mostly coming from an overproduction of plastics, and mostly single-use plastics. Next. Okay, still going back to the study we did, the Breaking the Plastic Wave. As I already told you, reduction is important, but it is not sufficient on itself. A complex problem needs a series of policies. As you can see in this chart, moving towards 2040, we may curb the problem and even reduce the total amount of plastics dispersed into the environment, what you may see in pink colors at the bottom of the chart, by means of a blend of actions consisting of reduction, which has to cover the main role anyway. 30% of the total problem may be sorted out by means of reduction. Then we may consider also replacement of plastics through other materials. This also includes, for instance, the issue around bioplastics, which we will also investigate at a later stage today during the webinar. We have to improve recycling, better recycling infrastructure, better building the demands for recycled polymers instead of virgin polymers by the market. We need also to consolidate safe disposal of what cannot be recycled or reused, so that we minimize the total amount of plastics into the environment. Next. This is, of course, being considered in the global agendas which are being drawn around the plastic problem. For instance, many institutions are discussing a global plastic protocol. For instance, this is OECD, the international organization. And as you can see, it is blending various measures. Some of them may be considered as the low-hanging fruits. The easiest is to consider banning something. Of course, it cannot be done overnight, because we are discussing about industrial productions, conversion of industrial sectors into new business models and something like that. But it does not take ages either. You know, in Europe, we adopted a directive which includes bans and restrictions on a few items, and they only gave us 2 years for that to be implemented. Then we may consider incentives, market-based instruments, economic instruments such as deposit refund schemes, pay as you throw, in order to promote better separate collection and better recycling. And we also may consider plastic taxes, as the European plastic tax, which was just been adopted. It is effective as of January the 1st this year, and it is charging the non-recycled plastic polymers. Let's go to the next one. Okay, just a few final remarks in this opening section of today's webinar about circular economy. This is the world-renowned butterfly diagram, which describes what is circular economy. This is the official chart taken from the European Union website. Maybe if we go to the next one, it may be slightly clearer. This is the butterfly diagram as it was codified in early times by Ellen MacArthur Foundation, one of the international organizations who have been working consistently on codification and promotion of circular economy. And as you can see in this butterfly diagram, we have got 2 wings. What we may do with the technical materials on your right-hand side, we may reuse, we may repair, we may refurbish, we may recycle, we may downcycle. So whatever we may do in order to keep the materials in the loop for as long as possible, in their highest possible quality. On the left-hand side, you have got the so-called biological materials, including bioplastics, which we will discuss later on. And we may consider biorefineries, anaerobic digestion, composting. We may do many things with that. But the most important, what we would like to draw your attention to, is to the tail of the butterfly. You can see in the tail what is coded as leakages of materials from circular management. And as you can see, it covers both landfilling and incineration, because both are destructive of materials, destructive of resources, so they are not able to keep materials in the loop. So we have to minimize basically rejects, residual waste, commingled plastics, which we cannot reuse or recycle or reduce. That's it. For the moment, I'd stop here.
Thank you very much, Enzo, for this opening. So we will now move to breakout sessions first, where you can reconsider what you just heard. You heard about circular economy. You heard many different policy tools already as a trigger, but we will go into some details of some of them. But you've seen how the systemic approach in the European Union is consistent since years, how bans are being implemented, at least, I mean, planned and then implemented, but we will go into details. But so far, let's just split to breakout rooms. I will ask our colleagues, coordinators, administrators to do that in a second. Just to explain, so we will split to few, maybe about 7, 8 groups. Each group about 10 people. We are 80. That's a great number. We'll have 10 minutes where everybody can speak without recording. There will be no recording of those sessions. Everybody can have few moments to express their thoughts about this question. Why are policies needed for a systemic change to tackle plastic pollution in Oman? We would like to hear your discussions. We'll join some of the breakout rooms, and at the end, we will then reunite here in the plenary session to discuss. In each group, there should be one person that will, from ESO or ourselves, who will take the ideas and note them down to then report to the plenary. So once again, we'll move to breakout sessions where we can exchange why those policies are needed for a systemic change rather than only small incremental changes that may work, may not, and probably will not address everything horizontally. And yes, because we don't know ourselves Oman so well. No one, I guess, was in Oman from us speakers here. And we would like to learn from you. How do you think that from your perspective, whether small changes are possible or whether we need a really very coordinated policy approach and implementation of those by different actors, by all of them, by all of you. So we will break out to 10 rooms now. No, 10 rooms, to breakout rooms, few, 7, 8 breakout rooms. And we will have some, yes, kind of moderators in those rooms. Okay, thank you. Shukran jazilan. 8 groups, very active. I visited most of them. Thank you to ESO colleagues and my colleagues EEB from the team, also to moderate and activate. But it was maybe not necessary because you were active anyway. I've heard some groups speaking Arabic. That's great. Now, what we could do is the feedback from the breakout rooms. We can take a good 10 minutes to hear from not every group. It depends. If you have something else to say, additional, what was not said, if the points, if the question is correct, maybe somebody didn't agree with this approach. And also, what were the main points raised? And if there were already some questions to us, the experts, please do raise also now. So I invite whoever from ESO would like to kick off and feedback the points from the discussion, please.
Yeah, hi, this is Olivia from ESO. I'm happy to start us off. So I think the main takeaways from our breakout discussion is that we all agreed that public appetite and commitment to mitigating the impacts of plastics is growing, but that the power comes when policies can incentivize a change in our behavior. So we looked both at, we focused largely on the behavior of consumers, incentivizing change for consumers, and incentivizing change in terms of how our plastic waste is disposed of. I think probably one point to add as well, though, is that we recognized the importance of thinking carefully about how those policies are implemented in such a way as to make people understand why the change is coming, give them time to ready themselves for the change, and where possible to mitigate any economic impact on the consumer, on the members of the public of that change. So I think those were the key points from our breakout session.
Can I?
Yes, please go ahead, Basha.
Also from our breakout room, two issues that were really important, I think. Of course, we agreed first that we need to have a kind of assessment for the situation, especially for the single-use plastic, to see the amount of plastic, single-use plastic bag, where it goes and how it is polluting our environment. We need kind of study or assessment for that. And the 2 points were very important. With first one, like even if we have policies, are we enforcing, are we implementing these policies? And the second point that also the society, is the society, like even if the society is willing to follow the policies and adapt, but do we have the alternative for the single-use plastic bag, single-use plastic?
Yeah, I can add, oh, okay.
Go ahead, Saad.
Go ahead. Okay, thanks. So from my group as well, we didn't really focus the discussions on what policies were needed. It was more a consideration of the fact that more information is needed so that we can make informed policies. So understanding what are the main sources of pollution. So for example, on beaches, it was described that, for example, fisheries and nets is a huge problem. So rather than just sending messages based on what's available in the media, we need focused studies in Oman to understand source of pollution, the main types of pollution that need to be addressed, whether the source of the pollution is from the mainland or whether it might be coming from offshore. The other thing that was mentioned is the importance of changing the culture and the mindset and starting with people. And finally, the importance of providing facilities, because in some regions, the provision of waste management facilities is very limited.
Thank you, Suad. Before we address some of those points, I ask every other also group leaders to share if you want.
Hi, everyone. Yeah. So just thank you. So just some thoughts from our breakout room. So we had quite some similar points as the other breakout rooms, but one additional thing that we discussed before the implementation of policies is having a gradual change in the community. So as one of our participants said, that no policy would work without the cooperation of the community. And it's very important to first raise awareness on why we're making all these changes. Because if we don't explain why, people might not accept them and adapt to them. And we also need to provide alternatives to single-use plastics and make them widely available in the market before we make such big changes. Otherwise, people will just refuse them. So we need to make it as easy as possible for them to adapt to these changes. And that's just one of the main important points that we discussed. And thank you. Go ahead, Jahina.
Thanks, Rabab. Just two other points that were discussed in my group, that we need policies in the education sector, so it can offer some guidance and educate people so they are more aware about the plastic crisis. Another point is to target, to have policies which targets big corporations, because we want to see a bigger change at a bigger scale, and because an individual can only do so much. Yeah, these are the two main points from my group. Thank you.
Shukran jazilan. Yes.
Hi everyone. I also Maya from ESO. Can I just quickly tell you about our group?
Please go ahead.
So basically our discussions just focused on the importance of investments, whether it's foreign or local investors, being able to address the issues of plastics and invest in them and consider plastic as a resource. And we also briefly touched upon the importance of collecting evidence of the current impact of plastics on the environment and the biodiversity And of course, like everyone else mentioned, the importance of awareness. Thank you. And creating incentives for recycling, minimize taxes, as Mr. Salim, who was mainly contributing to our session, has also said.
Thank you very much. Is there anything else we wanted to, the moderators wanted to add from their groups?
Hello?
Yeah, please.
You hear me?
Yes, Mohammed, we can hear you. Mahat.
Okay. Can I share something?
Yeah.
I want to share.
Please go ahead. Yeah.
Allow me to
share screen.
Yeah. Allow me to share. No, I cannot share.
We didn't plan sharing the screen. Maybe you can just say what you want.
No, it's okay now. It's okay. Just a minute. Okay, here you can see myself, Dr. Mahat Shamas, in Dhofar University. I'm teaching environmental engineering. So part of my teaching, I teach waste management. And also you can see in this slide, 45 kilograms of plastic, you know, each person will consume every year. You can see it?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Then I'll move to the second one. Yes, okay. Plastic is one of the recycling material, so we can recycle it. Here, we can, I mean, in Oman, we can implement this technology of recycling plastic. It's in worldwide, you know, some countries they use it. Here you can see they use fast food containers of plastic, and there is a plant, recycling plant for plastic, so they can, you know, cut these pieces of used plastic, and then it will enter to the furnace.
Yes.
Furnace of this recycling plants of plastic. And after that, you can see here the process is a small plant for recycling plastic. And the plastic fragmented are mixed here, and it will be bigger. And then in the here, heated and melted and made in pellets. And it again, pellets can be, I mean, new product of burger, for example, boxes or any kind of, I mean, plastic containers you can produce. So I'm just want to share with you that we can also implement, I mean, or we can, if the government put a policy that each, for example, governorate or in Muscat and Salal and Sohar, like that. First, we start with the similar recycling plants. So then maybe we can also solve the problem of plastic.
Yeah, Dr. Mahat, thank you very much.
You got
this is very interesting. Thank you.
You got the point, Doctor?
We got it. Please send this presentation or those slides to the organizers, and they will also share it. But for now, we have to move on back to the main presentation.
So I will stop sharing, right?
Please. Okay.
Okay.
Now,
okay. That's it.
So thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. This shows that there are solutions, though it was a technological solutions. We are going to speak about policies that are going to support certain solutions, certain technologies, and certain behaviors. A lot of questions, a lot of interesting points. I noted very much the enforcement. Yeah, policies will not work if there is no proper monitoring and enforcement. We'll touch upon that. If the society is willing, that's why all policies are consulted thoroughly here in Brussels, also like every policy has a long consultation process with all stakeholders, including regular citizens. Interesting points. Yes, the offshore waste, plastic waste is also important, but the studies also show that there is a lot of plastic coming from the land. And actually, Oman is one of the countries, as I checked some statistics, where the consumption of single-use packaging is one of the highest in the world. So there is a lot of problem here as well. And I know there are different movies showing about, nets, plastic nets, fisheries, and that's a big problem. But there is still a lot of problem, plastic problem coming from the land. And yes, the solutions, the alternatives have to be available. There are, but have to be available locally and affordable. These are very interesting points. If my colleagues would like to address some of the points raised, please, before we go to the second part.
No, very, very quickly, if I may jump in. I think you addressed it already in a very good way, in a very comprehensive way. One specific angle which was discussed in the breakout group I was taking part in, I was only there as a facilitator anyway, was the combination or the roles of education and policies. And some were saying that education may be more important than policies. Others were making the point that policies are anyway needed. But I would say that both are true, because there is some behavioral change which does not need much policy, such as making you more aware about the littering problem. But when it comes to recycling, we need organization, infrastructure, and market demand, and this requires also policy. Otherwise, good intentions and good behavior by the individuals would not be sufficient. So I think we have to keep open to consider the role of both education and policies.
And behavioral change was addressed very often in the groups, and possibly behavioral change is also to be addressed by proper policies, right? By making alternatives affordable, available, and also simply by banning some things. We cannot probably, hope that everybody will have the same mindset immediately. No? So by banning, that's why we have bans in Europe. By banning, you impose certain behaviors because alternatives exist, and the plastic bag is a clear example of this. Yeah.
And you promote new business models, because there will be room for new business models which are based on reuse, reverse logistics, pooling and standardization of formats, and so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm. And then we were also talking about incentives for recycling. So there we'll touch upon that, such as separate collection that makes streams clean and keep the value of the waste streams high so that they can be recycled if there is a demand. And demand can be also triggered by having, for example, recycled content. But we'll come back to that. If I may move now, unless somebody still has something to say from my colleagues or other ESO colleagues. If not, we'll move on because time goes on. So, okay, part two. I will now describe the policy landscape.
Sorry,
yes,
Piotr, someone just raised his head. The person with many numbers. So sorry, I cannot call you by name, but if you can unmute yourself.
Thank you. My name is Said Nabhani. I am from the Interior Municipality Council. With regard to the education, it's really a very excellent issue, either for the student or for the public. But when we educate student or public, for example, for the cycling or for the taking the plastics to such a containers, when we do give the education or when we press that in the media, in the other hand, that should be available. Yani, for example, where they put the plastic or they take it to the boxes or something should be available on the same time. Otherwise, if we just educate, but we don't hand in the other side on the site where they take the plastic, it will be difficult because that's what is noticed. Thank you.
Thank you for this point. Indeed, educating is important, but one question that we can discuss please later at the question and answers discussions, whether education will bring us fast enough to the solution. And our house is flooded, our flat is flooded. Do we now educate the kids that they have to close the tap properly, or we are really going to address the tap directly because we are decision makers? Yeah. But yes, we will come back to that. Let me move on, if I may. So I will describe the EU policy landscapes regarding plastics strategy in the EU, but I will also speak about something that was mentioned already, the European Green Deal, a new approach by the Commission that is here in place since 1.5 years, very ambitious as compared to others. And also how these policies unleash the upstream design potentials. Some of you mentioned that the problem has to be tackled at source. So how products are designed, first of all. So to design out the possible and very probable pollution, because already from the design stage, we may design this out. So yes, in Europe, we also have beautiful beaches, same as you have in Oman. We have lots of tourists, but we also have lots of packaging consumption and plastic consumption in general. We suffer from that. Our environment suffers, our tourism sector suffers, same as yours. And it costs because we have to clean up those beaches, of course, and it costs the municipalities. Who should pay that? We in the new law by the EU, it's the companies, the producers, so the consumers also of those products that will have to cover the costs of collection and of cleaning up. But yes, so in Europe there were lots of studies to raise the awareness and to bring the numbers to show that it's not only fishing gear that is problematic, but it's also very, very simple consumers goods, and most of them single use. So they came up with some policies, but just overall also on the European Union website, you can find that European waste laws has been defined since decades, maybe more than 2 decades. And there is a whole set of all laws that are at EU level directives and have to be implemented to national directives, and they cover from municipal solid waste all the way to hazardous materials, to electric equipment, to waste, to ships that are end of life, cars, etc. Big part of those policies is packaging. But also important, those policies are connected to larger strategies by the European Union that are long-term strategies, such as European Green Deal that was announced more than 1 year ago, but it will continue for years, for many years to come. The Circular Economy Action Plan, which has its second stage now, we started in 2014 with this concept. And you know circular economy already, as Enzo explained. But this is linked also to larger European industrial strategies, chemical strategy, because plastics is chemicals, zero pollution action plans, and biodiversity strategies. A guiding principle, which is for waste management, which is defined in the Waste Framework Directive in Article 4, which is binding for all policy decision makers, is the waste management hierarchy. So it starts with prevention of waste. Here on the right corner, you can see elaborated version of this triangle of waste hierarchy, elaborated by Zero Waste International Alliance, an international group of zero waste organizations, which we also are part of. So it focuses on the top stage of the triangle, which is rethink, redesign, reduce, reuse. Then many points that you mentioned, as the waste already has been generated, we have to treat it. So we have to recycle it, compost it, we have to recover it in a way, some way. Also, when talking about residual waste management, of course, there is still some residuals, either residuals from recycling or because they were not properly collected. They have to be managed progressively until we phase them out, because each one by one residual items that are most commonly found in the residual bin or in the environment, they should be addressed one by one so that we get rid of them and phase them out. As mentioned already before by Enzo, the leakage which from the circular economy is also at the bottom of the waste hierarchy, which is not desirable, unacceptable, in fact, which is any type of burning of waste, either for energy or not. But coming to the strategy on plastics. Yes, there are 4 priority areas which are there to address plastic pollution, but also to improve the circularity of plastics. Plastics are not economically viable as they are today because they are not properly collected. Their quality for recycling is still not good enough. So this is another priority, but there is also priority to drive investments, as many of you said, in innovation towards circular solutions. And there are funds that are designed for that, either public funds from the European Union, or there are funds coming from producers themselves, because they are obliged to create funds such as extended producer responsibility fund. And there is also a global action, as mentioned before, the global plastic protocol. There is at global level, at UN level, OECD level as well, actions to address plastic pollution. So very specific and probably most iconic European law that has been now adopted 2 years ago, but very soon, 5th of July, there is a deadline for member states to implement it, is the Single-Use Plastic Directive. It's pioneering, and it's being repeated. You know, it was inspiring for many other countries around the world. Canada, US, New Zealand have been taking similar actions by different names. For example, Break Free from Plastic Act in the US. And they are following certain similar approach, where we start by strong enforcement of bans. There is a group of products that will be banned, I will explain, but there are also long-term policy commitments where municipalities and cities put on themselves ambitious targets for reduction and also targets for recycling. There is a strong support to reusable solutions. When you were speaking about availability of alternatives, in fact, there are alternatives, and we know them very well, all of us, because they were there 10 years ago, 20 years ago. I don't know in Oman, but you've been using also reusable items for centuries. Reusable packaging or biodegradable packaging, but we will also speak about that. There is also well-known deposit return systems. When you buy a bottle of water of something, you pay a deposit. Let's say, I don't know how much, but let's say 50 cents, few riyals, and then you get it back when you return the bottle. But I will explain that more. Extended producer responsibility is one of the tools, economic tools, that are enforced here in Europe, so that to collect money from producers and to steer it back into the waste management system, so that the costs of managing waste, collecting, treating, and also costs of pollution of waste is covered by producers. So it's not covered, it's covered by producers. So it means by consumers, not by everybody in the society, those even who never consume those products. And then regarding enforcement, we cannot enforce if we also don't monitor the situation. We don't collect data from producers and from municipalities every year in order to improve and improve and improve. And if there is no monitoring, we also don't know if some producers are not just escaping the system or the obligations. So I was speaking about the Single-Use Plastic Directive. There were bans. So on the left side, what will be out already soon. Some countries already are doing that. Italy, France, some other countries are also planning that very soon. So cutlery plates, plastic straws will be out. Drink stirrers, some polystyrene packaging, stickers for balloons, sticks for balloons, cotton buds, and also oxo-degradable plastics. Maybe let's note that down because we can come back. Oxo-degradable plastic, which is still plastic and is single-use, is also going to be banned in Europe, as it's basically dangerous, but we can explain that later. What is, if not out, there are some items, plastic single-use items that are not out, will be still allowed on the market, but there will be some certain obligations on them. They will have to be clearly labeled, highlighting their plastic content and proper disposal methods, and environmental risks, such as for tobacco products, for wet wipes, cups, sanitary pads, etc. There will be obligation from 2024 to attach, so for producers, to make sure that the caps and the lids on bottles are attached permanently, because what we often find on the beaches is just the lids or the caps of bottles, and this is clearly wrong. Also, when you open a stomach of a bird, you sometimes you may find, well, I haven't done that, but the researchers did, and they find those lids also in the stomachs of birds. I'm sure that also happens in Oman. Then there is a recycled content obligation. There are two of them. One is in 25 and one is 2030. It's a stage obligation to include recycled content in new bottles. And it's not only PET bottles, it will be actually other plastic bottles as well for shampoo. So this recycled content is important because it drives the demand for clean material, secondary raw material, to be put back in the loop. Some companies are already announcing that they are doing at least 50%. Some of them are announcing that very soon they will go for 100%. There are some companies that already are doing 100%. But this is only possible if there is clean material on the market, clean secondary material to be used. That's why there is another obligation to collect separately 77 and then 90% of bottles, plastic bottles. That is in 2029. 90% separate collection of bottles. Can you imagine that? There are only a few countries in Europe that do that now, and these countries have deposit return systems. This is probably the only way to collect so much. I don't know what's the rate now in Oman, but I guess it's really far from this target yet. And yeah, why it's important? It's because such a good separate collection of bottles will keep the value of material, will keep the stream clean enough to be then processed and put back into bottle to bottle. So what was explained in the beginning, a closed loop recycling, high quality recycling. And so I see you wanted to say something on this? No. Okay. So I move forward. In the SUP directive, single-use plastic directive, there is also fishing gear that is addressed, because yes, it is big part of the pollution that is happening. So there will be those products will be required to producers will be required to cover the cost of collection of those items, fishing gear, from port reception facilities for its transport and for treatment. So they will be included in the extended producer responsibility schemes. But now what's next? So this was the SUP adopted 2 years ago, but the Commission, the European Union, is not stopping there. They don't stop. They are further looking at different products from the design stage to phase out any possible pollution that will happen. And we are looking at those 7 groups of products that are now high on the agenda, such as batteries, vehicle packaging, plastics, textiles, ICT products. So this is called the new Circular Economy Action Plan, which is part of the European Green Deal. And specifically for plastic packaging, there will be policy tools to look at over-packaging of waste and to try to reduce it through certain so-called essential requirements for packaging, which will also look at reducing the complexity of packaging materials so that to make them easier to recycle, driving reuse and recyclability of packaging, reducing toxicity of packaging, or even phasing out, basically, when it comes to food packaging. And yeah, and this will be obligatory, mandatory, essential requirements that will be also linked to the extended producer responsibility scheme to nudge the better design. On plastics, there is a lot of work ongoing to tackle microplastics. The intentionally added microplastics will be banned, restricted. And also there will be a policy framework of the use of biodegradable and compostable plastics and any bio-based plastics. It's not a straightforward topic. We will dig into that a little. And regarding all waste, all different waste streams, there is a lot of pressure now also, and it's good. It's also we are also very active here on waste prevention, on waste reduction. Overall, residual waste will have to be halved by 50%, so that we send less and less to landfills and incinerators, and instead more and more will go to waste recycling. So there is ongoing constant consultations with stakeholders and with the general public on all of those, so that they are, as you said, also properly understood by the general public and accepted. Regarding global policies, there is also a review of European rules for waste shipments. I don't know now how it will address, or if it will have implications to Oman. We may think about that during the open session of questions. But yes, that is also an issue. We should address waste locally rather than sending it out to other countries. And Europe is very much aware. We also recognize that we were sending waste outside Europe, but this is now recognized, and we are addressing this, not to send it anymore out. I invite you to check a few other points, reports. The one on the left is going to be published in 2 days, but I already shared a PDF with you. And it will show best examples of reduction and phase out of plastic in Europe. And on the right hand side, you can see the report that is taking stock of the best examples of the implementation of single-use plastic directive. And it also shows some, it basically elaborates more on this directive. Yes, different points, for example, the substitution of materials, whether substituting to wood or to paper materials is good. From our point of view, is not. Whatever is single use is still single use, and it should not be promoted unless in specific circumstances. Overall, on waste management, I invite you to check our materials here on this website, where we explain more about waste prevention laws and examples from different member states, about separate collection laws with the same examples, and the economic tools, instruments to address, to enforce waste management hierarchy, the pyramid that you've seen before. So I would like, one important point is separate collection and overall collection of plastic, and specifically separate collection. And this has to be a policy implemented at national level and implemented by cities according to their circumstances. So this is a big topic in Oman, I guess. I would like to ask Enzo to explain a few points on separate collection and why is it so important for plastics. Thanks.
Yes, indeed. Well, definitely, separate collection is one of the preconditions in order to have an effective recycling system in place. It's not the only precondition, because then we know we need recycling infrastructure. We need demand side actions in order to increase the absorbing capacity of recycled polymers by the market and something like that. But separate collection is one of the starting points. And yeah, we know that basically in Oman, you should be starting from scratch when it comes to separate collection, but this may cause some advantages, because once you have to start from scratch, you're still free to design the best way. So we briefly touch upon separate collection just to give you a touch, a taste of what has to be considered. Well, in this slide, you can see 4 streams of materials. In most situations, not all of them, but in most situations across Europe, the best performing schemes when it comes to separate collections are based on 5 streams. The 4 ones you can see here, besides residual waste. This is what is collected at the doorstep. We call it curbside collection. So on different days, households set out different materials. One day is for glass, and there is the glass truck which passes by and picks the glass. Another day is for plastics, another day is for the organics or for paper, and that day will be for residual waste. But if we dig deeper into the plastic issues, there is also room for optimization of separate collection of plastics. Because, you know, sometimes whenever you discuss separate collection, there's already right away something that crosses your mind. Is it affordable? Can it be cost optimized? Yes, there is huge evidence that the system can be cost optimized. Of course, it may be consistently fueled by extended producer responsibility, because with extended producer responsibility, it is the producers who have to bear the cost, most of the costs. Now in Europe, it will be 100% of the costs related to collection, transportation, processing, recycling, final disposal of the rejects, and the cost of removing litter from the open environment. This has to be covered by the extended producer responsibility fees, which the producers have to pay in order to propel the system. But also, separate collection itself may be consistently cost optimized. For instance, you may consider an operational and economic optimization, which is based for lightweight materials, such as plastics, on bags instead of using carts. Because since it is lightweight, there is no need to use a cart for mechanical loading. What is the benefit of that? That with a bag, you need 20 to 30 seconds per each pickup of the bag. Whereas with a cart, you need 2 to 3 minutes to carry the cart, hang it to the loading device, have it unload it onto the truck, and put it back at the curb. So it takes more time and more money, of course, because it's a matter of workforce, the total workloads, and so on and so forth. Also, an approach which is gaining momentum is to collect commingled lightweight packaging, such as plastics and metals, because both are very, very lightweight, both are compactable, and both are not breakable. So they remain in their state, and it's very easy to have them sorted out at material recovery facilities. You put there a magnetic separator for ferrous metals, an eddy current separator for non-ferrous metals, and you get the metals out. And then you need ballistic separators and optical sorters for the different polymers. One key point, though, is that, as I already said during the introductory session, unfortunately, much as this is covered and promoted and supported also economically by extended producer responsibility in Europe, out of whatever we collect in terms of plastics, typically 50% gets discarded by material recovery facilities, because it's very easy to recycle PET bottles, it's easy to recycle polypropylene bottle caps, it's much less easy to recycle, for instance, polystyrene or polypropylene films, or typically plastic films are much more difficult to recycle. But despite that, we always recommend to cover all packaging plastics in order to give full shape to the extended producer responsibility principle. Because we do not only have to target the easy to recycle plastics, but all the packaging plastics to give the burden back to the producers. Because this in turn has to trigger industrial rethinking and redesigning to shift progressively towards those materials that are more easy to recycle and recover. Let's go to the next one. Another consistent issue is bioplastics. You have seen this has been popping up here and there during our presentations. First of all, let me make it blunt, a very blunt statement. Bioplastics were not designed in early stages to address the littering issue. They are, first and foremost, they are a tool for separate collection of the organics. If you leave a bioplastic bag into the ocean, if the turtle meets it, it makes no difference whatsoever to the turtle or the dolphin, because it's still plastics before it degrades, you know? So let's go to the next one. So a few key points to consider. a few key points is, first of all, as we already said, bioplastics are not to be considered as a solution to littering or to marine litter more in specific. They are not made to degrade easily in the open environment. They are basically made to be composted in professionally centralized composting sites. Also, bioplastics is a common wording that conflates anyway two very different classes of plastics. One is bio-based plastics and one is biodegradable plastics. We will see that in a while. They behave in a totally different way and they address totally different issues. We've got solid and reliable standards for biodegradable, or better to say, compostable plastics. One is in Europe, EN 13432. One is the American one, ASTM D6400. There is also an ISO standard which aligns with the European and the American one. And those are the trustable standards, test methods, in order to assess compostability of the plastics. But as we said, the strategy cannot be widespread and far-reaching. It must only be considered for specified and qualified applications, only in connection with separate collection of biowaste. If there is no separate collection of organics, compostable plastics make no sense. Make no sense because there would be no composting site able to get them and to turn them into a final organic fertilizer, into a soil improver. So some sensible application would be compostable bags in order to maximize participation in separate collection systems, to make the system user-friendly, or closed loop applications such as when reusable is not a possible option. For instance, in some festivals, parties in the countryside, then you may shift to plan B, such as compostable items to be co-collected with food scraps and go to a composting site. Next one, as we were saying, bio-based and biodegradable is a totally different issue. Next, please. With biodegradable, we refer to the end-of-life behavior. So does it degrade after its use? Whereas with bio-based, the next one, please, we address sourcing. So it is coming from renewable sources. But for instance, if you consider a bio-based polyethylene, there is a fully bio-based polyethylene, which is coming from fermentation of the sugar cane. But it behaves just as normal polyethylene. So it should not go to a composting site. It should go to a mechanical recycling site. So it's a little bit confusing, as you understand. And also, bio-based touches upon a few sensitive issues such as land grabbing, diverting farmlands towards producing feedstocks for bio-based plastics. So there are a few sensitive environmental and societal issues. Next one. So coming to compostable plastics, as we already mentioned, a few sensible applications, compostable bags, in order to maximize participation in separate collection programs for the organics and maximize the quality. Otherwise, people sooner or later will be compelled to use ordinary conventional plastic bags in order to keep their cars clean. But this would pollute the compost because it would take conventional plastics to a composting site. Next one. Anyway, once again, a widespread adoption should never be considered. So they are not made to replace all the packaging or the plastic packaging, nothing like that. Only in a few specific applications which are connected to separate collection of the organics. So for instance, another one would be the coffee capsules, because in the coffee capsule, 90% of the weight is the coffee grounds, which are compostable. So if we replace conventional plastics with compostable plastics in the capsule, everything is made compostable. And so we can take it out from residual waste, from mixed garbage, and send it to composting schemes. If we consider a wider adoption, we would incur many issues, such as a higher confusion, a higher entropy in the system. We have to consider that people do not have a degree in chemistry. And so they would get confused. Is it a compostable plastics or is it a conventional plastics? So we would have cross-contamination. conventional plastics ending up in composting sites and polluting compost, and compostable plastics ending up in conventional plastics and polluting mechanical recycling. We cannot afford it, of course. It's not fully sustainable. We always have to consider the key principles of sustainability. Plan A for sustainability when it comes to waste, rejects, discards is reuse and reduction. Recycling is only plan B for sustainability because it takes resources, it takes energy to recycle something. So it's still one way. If we consider the compostable plastics, let's only consider them if connected to separate collection systems for the organics and when reusable is not an option. And only for niche applications as those ones which we have just mentioned. Next one. We should have, also watch out because we know there is an oxo-degradable discussion going on in many Middle East countries. There is an aggressive marketing strategy on oxo-degradable plastics. We want to be as neutral as possible, but we have to expose facts and figures because we are here to help you, to facilitate your decision-making. Oxo-degradables are not biodegradable. They do not ultimately produce carbon dioxide and water vapor. It's basically ordinary plastics, polyethylene, with a few biodegradable fillers. So they are cheaper, but not safer. They fragment into smaller pieces, but they do not degrade. They do not meet the requirements of the trustworthy standards for compostable plastics we just considered, because those standards also include a test on inherent biodegradability, which is not met by oxo-degradable plastics. So this has been basically considered at European level as the scientific method to produce microplastics, because it fragments them into smaller pieces. So this is why they have been banned in the European Union under the SUP directive. Whatever items made of oxo-degradables is fully banned from the market. It's fully subject to market restrictions. Okay, now next section is about reusable and COVID. Because we are still under the pandemics, hopefully we will soon be out of that. But for the moment, we are arm wrestling with this bad guy, SARS-CoV-2, the viral agent of COVID-19. And of course, what may cross your mind is, hey guys, you are talking to us about reusables, but this is reusable plastics a sensible strategy while we are under a pandemic? Let's go to the next one. Of course, there is an emotional angle about the pandemics, and this has been triggering a new interest in single-use plastics. That's it. It was that. But we have always to refer to scientific evidence. This one was one of the early articles which were published. This one as early as February 2020. We were not yet under the pandemics, but this was consistently investigating the survival of the viral agents on different types of surfaces. Let's go down to the summary results. And as you can see, next, they have seen that the viral load survives on cardboard, paper and cardboard, let's say, for typically 24 hours. On stainless steel, for typically 24 hours. On plastics, for typically 72 hours. The point is not that much that the survival is longer on plastics than on other materials. The point here is that on any type of surface, there is a certain length of the survival. So follow me. If we increase the use of single-use materials, single-use packaging, of course, this will protect what's inside, but what's outside the packaging may have been touched by anybody. So if we increase the volume of single-use materials that get into our personal sphere day by day, this makes us more vulnerable, not safer. Or if we can stretch it through a stretched out example, let's go to the next one. Would you feel safer? Next, drinking water from your own steel canteen you just filled at your own tap, or next, from a plastic bottle you just took from the shelf at the supermarket, which may have been touched by anybody? Of course, this is a rhetoric question, and the answer would be no. My own reusable makes me feel safer. We are not making the point that reusable is always safer, but neither it is true the contrary. Both reusable and single-use have to be codified under the safety requirements, but in most situations, since reusable is personal, it makes you safer, whereas single-use makes you more vulnerable. Let's go to the next one. Also, let's put everything in a timeline. The pandemics, we had it in 2020, now we are in 2021. If we consider the environmental policy, the environmental agenda, it has got mid and long-term trajectories. For instance, in Europe, we have got a preparation for reuse and recycling, call it net recycling target, 65% at 2035. We have got closer targets, such as an obligation for separate collection of the organics by 2024. And in 2021, we will have the enforcement of the Single-Use Plastics Directive. Well, now let's go to the next one. All the world is looking forward to have most of the population vaccinated. This is happening right now in many countries, here in Europe. We are hopeful it will soon happen also in the Middle East region. But after the vaccine, we will have sorted out the problem to a remarkable extent. So, of course, the environmental agenda and the plastic policy should be hung to the long-term trajectories of environmental sustainability, economic efficiency, industrial efficiency, and occupational implications, because with more recycling, more reuse, we will have more labor-intensive schemes, and so it will create more jobs. This is why Europe did not detour from the plastic agenda by any tiny millimeter. They said blatantly, no, we will keep the Single-Use Plastics Directive because it has got no relationship whatsoever with the current pandemics. With that, I would say that I am done with my part.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Enzo, for bringing the horizontal topics, which is very much in the decision of policymakers, which is separate collection of plastics, the confusions around biodegradable, bio-based, and the situation where we are now, COVID. We were having planned question answers, but we are quite behind the time. I would just ask maybe if there is technical questions right now, but no discussion, but questions on what was said, and then I go to the third part of the webinar so that we can have questions answered at the end. Some clear points of clarification. Yes, please. Go ahead. You're muted. Yeah, you're muted still.
Thank you. It's not a question, it's a comment, just to avoid the confusion of type of plastic for circulation or for recycling. Can we just add in the policy, when we make the policy for a manufacturer, to write on the product what type of product, so it will be easy to differentiate and send it for recycling. Thank you.
Yeah, overall, I just say that there is a labeling scheme in Europe that is planned, and products will have to have this information where they should be disposed. But I don't know how much details, Enzo, can be added.
No, well, basically, we've also got a global labeling scheme, the one which is based on the 7 logos for seven different types of polymers. The problem is that the first 6 ones refer to a specific polymer, PET, HDPE, LDPE, PP, and something like that. And then the 7th one conflates all the rest of the polymers, which makes it still very, very complicated for people. And we cannot afford, to have 50 different types of logos. So basically in Europe, we collect plastics, we give it back through the extended producer responsibility scheme to the producers. They have to take on the responsibility to optimize the recycling infrastructure and to redesign the harder to recycle plastics. Because of course, yeah, yours is a very good question. We cannot ask for each and every household to take a degree in chemistry or in material management. That's it. We have to make it user-friendly and as simple as possible. Yeah. But your point is, yeah, is appropriate. Labeling is important. Instructions and labeling. We have to make it as simple as possible.
Thank you for this question and the answer. I move ahead with the last part, and let's collate all the questions at the end, please. Okay. So the last part is for instruments to change the market, which were many of them basically all of them were explained. But a few slides to recap. Targets for reuse, waste prevention and recycling as a commitment of the government to move into this direction consistently. There should be no decision by the government that will not that will not be compatible with reaching those planned targets, even if it's in 10 years, 15 or 20 years, those targets. Yeah? Each decision has to have this impact assessment, whether it complies with the target or not. EPR, extended producer responsibility, was mentioned many times because you cannot really speak about the horizontal issues without touching on this very important tool. Deposit return systems, very widespread in Europe and also in the world, I will explain, and recycled content as a way to drive demand for secondary raw materials. So economically speaking, plastic, it was said already, is a good material because we need it for different products, to make them lightweight, to make them technologically developed. But most of plastics is single-use, and it a lot of half of it, as said, and it loses its quality, its economic value immediately after the first use. So this is where we have to address the issue, so that to improve the market of this. We have the targets. First of all, this is the first point I wanted to say. We have reviewed the packaging directive in Europe 2 years ago. Now it's being implemented in the countries. It's a first step. So next, we will have this tax that applied already from this year, 2021, where each ton of plastic, unrecycled plastic that is reported, plastic packaging, will cost additional €800 per ton. That will have to be paid to the European Union fund. And this also drives the situation that the market that producers do not want to pay this cost, or the governments also do not want to pay this cost, of course. So they will do everything possible in order to recycle, to collect, and also a way of reducing this tax, this payment, is simply to ban certain items that are typically not recycled. Higher EPR fees. These have to be upgraded everywhere, basically in Europe, to cover the cost of collection and recycling. There will be also different additional tools to boost recycling and sorting infrastructure and harmonize separate collection as a prerequisite, one of the prerequisites of improving recycling. Then we will have the first, the next target, which is 50% recycling of plastic packaging, and 5 years later, in 2030, it's 55% target. As you see, all of those policy decisions go into the direction of reaching this target as a minimum. Just to remind, this is a minimum target we have to reach. Of course, this will be revised and might be even higher if might be upgraded upwards if the policies go well. And based on the best available techniques and best examples of countries that this implementation is going well. EPR was very often, extended producer responsibility was very often mentioned, and it is implemented in many countries around in Europe, but also in the world. This is a unique way to hold producers responsible financially for whatever they put on the market, so that it's properly collected and recycled. And also that the costs, environmental costs, or for the costs for the municipalities of cleaning up the litter coming from these packaging items or different items will have to be covered by those producers. And it means by producers, by consumers. But we have to understand that not every citizen is a consumer of some drinks. So not every consumer, not every citizen, not every taxpayer should cover those costs, but only the consumers. And this is also very important for producers, because it drives them to better design their own delivery models and products, so that they can reduce the costs, because those EPR fees are paid per ton of material. And even better, if those costs are being modulated. As we speak here in Europe now, we are planning to have modulation of those fees, where the fee is depending, the level of the fee is depending on the environmental performance of the product. If it's well performing environmentally, then it gets lower EPR fee per ton of material put on the market. But if it's still not performing well, before it is banned totally, it will have the high fee, so that the economy will work itself to phase it down. How it relates to plastics, it will mean that plastic market of plastic products will also have to transform more into the fundamental redesign and innovation of the product, so that they might be delivered in another way. Maybe food can be delivered without packaging at all, or maybe we will use reusable solutions, glass or reusable plastic. That is also totally feasible, as mentioned here by New Plastic Economy report by Ellen MacArthur Foundation. But the rest of the plastics that are packaging that is still to be with us has to be radically improved when it comes to their recycling economics and quality. So it will, for producers specifically, it will translate into different elimination strategies, reuse strategies, and maybe substitution of material, so that it's better substitution or improvement of material, so that it's fully recyclable. We cannot afford any more materials that are not easy, viable economically and technologically to be recycled or composted. So if we have to think holistically, and we have to, it's not only about the packaging itself, but it has to be thought together with the product, material choice, the format, components, but also we have to rethink the product, the size, the shape, the amount, and then the business model, whether we can deliver the same product quality, right? Food, let's think about any type of food. It can be delivered maybe in a different way, in a bulk, without packaging. It can be delivered by yes, reusable online shopping also, which is possible. And location of production has to be also thought through again. Yes, so in Europe, this brings results. This was quite theoretical, but now in practice, we have more and more shops that are selling in bulk. So without packaging, people come with their own packaging and they buy whatever they want in the specific quantity they want. And there are networks of those shops in Germany, Infographic, Biosphere, Granel in Spain, F.Corta in Italy, and many, many more, actually. Many more are popping up because it just makes sense, and it proves also to be economically viable. And when it comes to online shopping, there are also solutions that are triggered by those changes, by increasing costs of plastic put on the market. So producers are trying to rethink their models, and they sell in online, even in reusable packaging, both consumer to consumer, but also business to business when it comes to bigger transport products. Different transport of products. There are different examples here from one of the reports I mentioned before. For example, takeaway food in Switzerland. There is a company called Recircle that put in place plastic packaging, but reusable. So you see, plastic can be useful, but it must be reusable. And of course, this cannot happen without a deposit return system for that. I will explain deposit return systems in a second. There are also bans in other countries in the world, like Taiwan and in the US, California, where not only plastic single-use forks, for example, or cups are banned, but also other single-use alternatives, paper or wood, are also banned in order to put in place really reusable items, especially when it comes to restaurants. It's crazy that when even in a restaurant where we want to eat in, we are receiving a single-use container. That's crazy. So those countries are also implementing a total ban on some single-use items, whatever the material, in order to boost reuse. And then in Flanders, country where we are in Belgium, a region in Belgium, there is a ban on single-use cups and cans and bottles during the public events. So here we see a clear example of procurement, public procurement. Whenever there is a permission given by the city to organize a festival, one of the conditions is that organizers use the reusable alternatives rather than create more problems by offering single-use containers. Also in Spain, in Horeca sector, so hotels, catering, and the retail, there is an obligation to put in place certain percentage here, 80% of beer, 40% of water in reusable containers by 2028. I'm sorry. And then in France, there are also similar targets put in place in Balearic Islands as well. So a requirement that certain share of the market has to be covered by reusable containers. And just to finish on, yes, almost reusable deposit return systems, they are very popular now brought in Europe in order to meet the objectives of the SUP directive, single-use plastic directive. And many more countries are talking, preparing them, consulting with stakeholders in order to implement those systems. The DRS system can work both for single-use packaging, so that to make sure that it comes back to the system in a separate way, in a separate collection way, in a separate stream. That's the right side of the chart. But what is more interesting for us and for the environment, because it's proved it's better for the environment and for less CO2, is reusable options. Of course, in order to get back the container, glass or reusable plastic or whatever, it's reusable, refillable, it has to be collected back. So we need this deposit return system so that the consumer pays upfront, small amount of money, but then consumer gets it back when he returns the container. And it's very important, it also cuts the costs for municipalities in many ways. Of course, it is known that the most difficult mile is the first mile to collect. So here, the first mile is done by each and every of us by consuming the product and bringing back the result, bringing back the container to the shop. It can be brought to the machines, but it can be also just collected manually. There are many different ways why the municipalities are saving money. For example, on less costs, less littering. So there is less cost connected to cleaning up campaigns, which currently are unfortunately covered by either municipalities or by volunteers. Yeah, you also organize in Oman those campaigns, but this problem of littering could be solved immediately by putting in place the deposit return systems. There was also a bit of discussion on the improved circularity of products when it comes to improved recycling, whether it's always good to just transform to substitute material from plastic to another type of material which is still single use, such as aluminum can, even if it's easier to recycle, but doesn't really make sense. It's still single use. Or we even see the Tetra Paks, the beverage cartons used for water, which is a bit, I would say, a lot of lost materials here if we can use as reusable. And of course, the best always is when we don't use packaging at all, but that is a bigger issue. I know in Oman tap water is not drinkable. However, as I was also in Bangladesh, where this water was not drinkable, we have used systems like reverse osmosis to clean up your water. So, you know, from the tap, and it was totally drinkable. So everyone can install such a simple machine or at offices or at, yes, schools and hospitals, and therefore cut down the amount of plastic bottles that have to be used. So just to wrap up for producers, don't think just about packaging, but look at all three elements: packaging, product, and business model. Redesign the system. Remember about the order of strategies. So remember the waste management hierarchy, where prevention and reuse comes first, and then recycling and composting. I mean, this is for producers, but this is also very important for every policymakers to follow this waste management hierarchy. And last question, whether it's a bit related to the first question today, whether we need policy changes, horizontal systemic changes, or we can be happy with only small incremental changes of materials, which maybe are too slow to bring us into the solution. So that's basically the end of the presentation today. We'll have now a bit of time for questions. Yes, this slide is a call for action for you, all of you, stakeholders in the plastic value chain and decision makers in Oman. The system is broken, not only in Oman, it's broken globally, but you have tools in place as you have legal power to oblige stakeholders to do things, to change their design and their value chain, and improve holistically, starting from prevention and reuse, and then putting on the market only material that is totally, fully recyclable. And then, of course, putting in place investments to make sure that there are facilities to recycle those materials. This is just the last slide with our contacts. But let's now move. Angel, if you are there, I invite you to moderate the discussion. We can have few discussion. We have some minutes for discussion and then for wrap up and closing.